Good evening. Welcome to Reflections on Granby. My name is Mike Malloy, and I'll be your host this evening. Our guest tonight is James Calendar Heminway, a 52-year resident of Granby. He moved here in 1960. We're going to refer to him tonight as Cal, which most people in town will know him as. And why don't we get started?
Yes, sir.
Nice to see you tonight, Cal.
My pleasure to be here.
Okay, so you were born on April 28th, 1936 in Mount Kisco, in Mount Kisco at the hospital from Chappaqua, New York.
Right.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your early memories from Chappaqua?
Well, my father worked in the city and got on a train and commuted in there every day.
Okay.
Chappaqua was, at that time, about the same size that Granby was when I moved here.
Oh, wow.
About 5,000 people. My father decided when we moved out it was getting too big and moved out. But anyway, I was brought up there during the war, Second World War, and it was a place where you walked to school, crossed railroad tracks, did all kinds of things we don't do today.
Oh, no.
And
you survived.
And I somehow survived, along with a lot of other people.
Yeah.
It was essentially a nice commuter town. It was where Horace Greeley lived, who used to be the editor of the New York Herald Tribune and was, I guess, the most notorious resident of Chappaqua. There's a statue of him there that the kids used to do all kinds of nasty things.
His big claim to fame was he was a newspaper editor?
He's the editor of the New York Herald Tribune.
That name rings. I mean, it must have been quite a position in this day.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Okay, so what did your dad do?
My father was in a businessman. He was in the blueprint business, actually.
Okay.
And was quite busy during the war with all the business that was going on with that. And after the war was over, in 1945, things got a little tough, and we discovered what it was like to live from hand to mouth for a while.
So after the war, so the Depression, you were born in 36, so you wouldn't remember much of that. So you were a baby.
We were, I think, kids of the Depression, because we certainly knew what it was not to have things.
So by the time you were really aware of things, you were in the war, basically. It was probably.
I can remember when the war started. I can remember Roosevelt going on the radio.
What are some of your memories of your early years in Chappaqua? I mean, you kind of anything that you find yourself telling people about, or?
No, not really.
No, you were pretty young. So how long did you live there? How long?
We moved out, actually, when I went away to college. That was pretty much when I left. We left, I think, in 55. And I had started college in 54.
Okay, so you went through your school years in Chappaqua?
Yeah, I actually went to a private school for a while. I suppose being on the school board now, I shouldn't admit that, but...
Well, no. It's all experience, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So did you attend public school up to a certain point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, through 9th grade.
What was that like? What was the schools in Chappaqua?
That was the Horace Greeley School.
It's a small
because
town,
of Horace Greeley. There were probably 1,800 kids in the school.
Okay.
And there was one very large building that housed kids from 3 through 12.
Okay.
While I was there, there was a small primary school and a separate kindergarten, but the rest of it was all there. And it was a good school then, and now it's one of the top schools in the nation, actually.
Okay, so your parent, the town's grown quite a bit since you lived there?
Chappaqua?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yes. Yeah.
It's where the former president lives there.
Well, Bill and Hillary lived there.
Kind of, when they were there, right?
In Becky Wedgwood's house.
Oh, is that?
Yeah, I knew Becky Wedgwood. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
That's funny.
So,
that's great. So what did your mom do?
She was at home.
She was at home? How many brothers and sisters?
I had a brother and a sister.
Okay. All right, so you graduate high school from where? Where did you end up going?
I ended up at the Hotchkiss School over in Lakeville.
Okay. It's just a private school. It wasn't anything particular? I mean, it didn't have a specialty or anything like that?
Well, when it was created, it was the place that people sent their kids who wanted them to go to Yale.
So it was kind of a prep school.
Oh, it was a prep school.
Oh, okay, so that
is
was
a prep
its,
school.
That was his claim to fame. Okay.
That's what it was claims to fame at that time. Yes.
Okay. And you felt you got a good education there?
Yes. Oh, I hope so.
Yeah, I would think. Yeah, parents were paying for it. Okay, so you graduate high school. Where do you go?
I went to Yale.
Okay, so you went to Yale. You got a degree in
History.
history. You mentioned that you'd served in the military. How
Yes.
did that fit in?
Well, when I was in college, that was just after Korea. And in those days, we had a draft,
Okay.
and people knew they had an obligation to serve, to do something, or that, or be drafted, or what have you. And I, frankly, wanted to get my college behind me. At the same time, knew I had an obligation to serve, so I was in ROTC
Okay.
for the 4 years.
So that was
And
part of your Yale experience.
It was part of my 4 years in college, and then when I graduated, I was commissioned in the Navy.
Okay.
And
So you went in as an officer.
I went in as an officer, and I spent 2 years on a destroyer.
What was that like?
That was a lot. That was fun.
Quite an adventure for you.
I enjoyed my Navy time. I think that people these days who don't get involved in some kind of service like that, whether it's the armed services or the Peace Corps or something of that nature when they get through school, I think they're missing something. For me, it was I found it very valuable, and I think it helped me grow up a little bit.
Where did you travel? Where did you deploy?
Well, that was only one of the problems. The ship was home ported in Norfolk, Virginia, and it was a one-of-a-kind ship, and we used it. It was used as a test platform for anti-submarine missiles at the time, and it was. We were in Key West. We were on the West Coast. But we never got really over to the Mediterranean or any other places that.
So you were around the coast of the United States and
Coast of the United States, Caribbean, through the Panama Canal up to the West Coast in Long Beach, where we were doing some evaluation work.
What they train you for in the Navy? Was it just?
Well, it was.
Officer?
I was a shipboard line officer,
Okay,
driver.
keeping things going straight.
Well, no. As opposed to being a pilot or something else, I was trained essentially to con a ship.
Okay.
So you had, in this case, 7,800 tons of ship and about 500 men. And when the captain wasn't there on the bridge, there's an officer conning the ship.
Okay.
Officer of the deck. So I spent my time essentially qualifying in that category, and also I was in the gunnery department. So we dealt with the ship's guns and the swabbies who kept things clean, the boatswain's mate, and that sort of thing.
So that was a good experience for you.
Oh, I had a wonderful time.
Yeah. Okay, so you graduate, you fulfill your 2-year term, and you left, and where'd you go from there?
Well,
I should ask, was that a 2-year mandatory at that point? Or did you have to serve 2 years? Is
yes,
that the way it was structured?
that was your
Okay.
obligation.
All right. Okay.
It was either 2 or 3, depending upon how much money you got from it.
Okay.
And I think that same sort of thing follows today for people who volunteer for really any of the services.
It's a nice way to kind of follow up college, huh?
I thought so.
Yeah, it kind of sticks you in the real world and with your degree. Okay, so you're 6 years out of high school. You've got a degree, and was it a four-year degree from Yale?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
History degree. You served your time in the Navy. Where do you go?
Well, at that point in time, I'd also gotten married.
Oh, somewhere in there. Okay.
So
what's your wife's name?
Sue.
Sue. Okay.
And Sue and I were married about roughly halfway through my military career.
Where'd you meet?
Actually, when my parents left Chappaqua, they moved to Cornwall, Connecticut,
Okay.
and she happened to be living there.
Okay.
I happened to meet her.
Okay. Were you in Yale at the time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so for the last year and a half, actually, she followed me around. We had some stuff that I kept in my stateroom, some couple of cups and saucers and a couple of sheets and pillowcases and so forth and so on.
Right.
She drove the car. She actually was followed me out to the West Coast and was down in Key West and in Norfolk.
So it was an adventure for her too.
Oh yeah, we've had probably, I don't know, 6 or 8 different apartments in about a year and a half.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So when I got through with the Navy, obviously it was time to find a way to make some money, because I certainly wasn't making any there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I ended up getting a job with IBM in Hartford in their marketing organization.
With a degree in history.
Yeah.
That's an interesting. Yeah.
Well, it's one of those things.
Yeah.
I did better in history than math, although I used my math when I got into working for IBM.
So what did you do for IBM?
Well, I was with them for almost 30 years, and during that period of time, I spent about a third of it in the field marketing organization, essentially the technical side of sales and sales management, both in Hartford and up in Springfield.
Okay.
And then the other 2/3 of my time was spent in various staff jobs in headquarters locations. I was somewhat notorious both here and with my IBM colleagues because I decided I didn't really want to move.
So you were, whereas they used to bounce all over the country?
I used to commute from here to White Plains, New York, and various other places down there.
Oh, okay. So you had your house and you stayed there.
Yeah,
Where were you living?
We liked Granby, I guess.
So you moved and then after you left the Navy, you went right to Granby?
We came to Granby.
After you got your job?
I got my job and moved to Granby. We decided at the time that, knowing IBM, being unsure of what we were doing, we figured we'd probably be here for a couple of years and then we'd move on.
Right.
So we obviously got that wrong, because it's 52 years later, we're still here.
So IBM was almost like, for people, now it's still a big entity, but it was like the Microsoft of its day. I mean, it was a huge concern, yeah.
Well, it wasn't huge when I was there.
Oh, okay. So it was
well, at least not to begin. It was. I think the year that I started, it became $1 billion company.
Okay.
And of course, it's something over $100 billion now, I think.
Right, but it actually had a peak there where it was off the charts.
It was going off the charts. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so you're working for IBM. Why don't you describe what you actually did? Well, what was your actual job? You said you were a field manager.
Well, the first thing I did after, if you will, basic training,
yep,
which was very basic. It was actually the old so-called unit record equipment, which were the punch cards.
Okay.
With all the electromechanical machines, and you're feeding these punch cards in.
That's right. They used to have the little punch cards with the holes in them.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I remember that somehow parents would bring them home.
Yeah. I was trained to deal with the machines that handle that stuff. It took 6 or 8 weeks down at a school in Newark, New Jersey.
Okay.
And we had bought the house on Stardust Drive.
Okay.
Got back to Hartford, and they immediately sent me to a school to train on the use of a basic computer.
Okay.
And a salesman discovered that I was there, and I was just a miserable little trainee, but I was a body that could be used.
So he liked something about what he saw,
and I ended up working on a proposal to the State Department of Motor Vehicles.
Okay.
And we ended up getting the business, and I then had the obligation to take the proposal that we had written and actually make it work.
Okay.
So
you had a scheme, and you had to put it into play.
Well, yeah, it's absolutely, you put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
So we actually installed really the first computer that the state really ever used productively.
Okay.
And they used that particular programs and stuff that I either wrote myself or worked on for probably the next 10 years.
Interesting.
So it was kind of fun.
So you were a hands-on. You were like interacting. You weren't just a supervisor. You were actually.
Oh no, I was. You know.
You were the guy that had to make it work.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it was the technical side of sales, if you will.
So it was a challenging position, I would think. Yeah.
It was a good job.
Yeah.
It was a good job. Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we jump back a little bit? So you're married, you got your job, you come. How did you find Granby?
Well, Sue obviously knew something of Connecticut because she lived in Cornwall.
Okay.
And I had moved to Cornwall with my family, and IBM had said, when I actually interviewed with them in New York City, and they said, we'll go to Hartford because that's near where you live. And
right.
They were trying to get rid of me, I think, so I'm fine. Went up and interviewed in Hartford and was offered the job. And we looked around. We looked in, I think, south of Hartford. I had a brother who lived in Simsbury, and we decided Simsbury is much too formal for us.
Was it? Yeah.
Even in 1960. So we came out to Granby, and at that time, Granby was described by its promoters as, I think it was in the town report, that Granby was a good Republican town.
They actually described it.
They actually described it as a good Republican town.
30 years later, when I was growing up, we always thought of it as a cow town.
Well,
because it was still kind of country.
Well, it was also cows, but
I
think there were less than 5,000 people in town.
Yeah.
There were a lot of operating farms.
Okay.
Probably well over a dozen of them, as I recall.
Right.
A lot fewer houses, no infrastructure to speak of.
Right.
The town hall was the old town hall kindergarten down here, which is the
really?
the building.
Okay. Wow.
That was was next to the first church, and we didn't. We had an old. I was trying to figure that out a number of years ago in terms of what we actually happened since we moved to town in terms of just the infrastructure that's here.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
And it's post offices, it's firehouses, it's town hall, it's libraries, it's schools, ambulance.
You moved in right as the society was playing catch up with the baby boom. So there was building everywhere at that point, huh?
Well, but Granby, I think you mentioned it was cows.
Well, that was in the 70s.
Well, but even in the 60s,
Yeah.
They used to have a drugstore down in Simsbury, Doyle's drugstore, and they'd go down there, and the Simsbury folks would go down there and talk nasty about Granby and talk about the fact that we were a bunch of farmers up there.
Yeah.
And that, I think, was probably true.
Right.
But,
it was
they had a lot of nice school buildings. They had the what's the name of the Eno Memorial Hall. They had a lot of infrastructure buildings that we didn't have in Granby.
Right.
I mean, we really had nothing.
Right.
So it wasn't so much a question of anything but people deciding that if they wanted to live in Granby and they liked it here, that we had to sort of take a deep breath and start doing things for ourselves and create the infrastructure that we, I think, in large part, we enjoy today.
Well, Simsbury was the original town.
Yes.
And then everything kind of, East Granby kind of split off.
Well, Granby split off.
And then East Granby split off.
They split off from us.
East Granby did.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you split in half, and then it split again.
Right.
So it would make sense that
you're about to lose your speaker there.
Okay. So it would make sense that the infrastructure was developed in Simsbury. I mean, that was the hub originally.
Well, I think a lot of that was because they were probably closer to Hartford. They had two railroad trains or lines that came through town.
Right.
They were much wealthier and had been around longer.
More manufacturing.
But much of what they had was really probably built in the late 19th, early 20th century.
Right.
Whereas Granby, as I recall reading someplace, being North Granby interested, I think they didn't get paved roads to the center of North Granby until 1942.
Yeah, we had some other guests on from Granby talking about the unpaved roads, especially in West Granby and North Granby, up until the 60s, right?
We had.
So you've seen a lot. You moved in right at the beginning of a boom of development, really.
Yes.
Yeah. What was your first impression of Granby when you came here? Do you remember? I mean, what was it? Did it ring true with what you'd been told?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you were.
No, we had some contact. Sue's father was in the legislature from Cornwall,
Okay.
and he knew Albert Sweeten,
Okay.
who lived on North Granby Road. The Ayers and the Sweetens are an old Granby name. Anyway, he knew the Sweetens
Okay.
and knew Albert Sweeten, and that was sort of a connection to us, and then to the church. And
Okay, so you had some basis of
Yeah.
connection. Your brother was in Simsbury. So,
Right.
yeah. Okay, so you moved in. Where did you move in Granby originally?
we went Stardust Drive.
Stardust Drive. Where is that?
Well, it's a little north of the geographic center,
So not
off
far
Wells,
from the
off
center.
Wells Road.
Okay. So that was, and as you were having children, you decided you needed a bigger home.
Well, it was a very small house.
Okay. Okay. So it wasn't.
We ended up with 4 kids. So
Okay.
when number 3 was on the way, we decided it was time to.
You can only stick 3 in one room, right?
Right. Well, so we then moved up onto Granville Road, and it was so-called the Old Peck House,
Okay.
which I guess the Pecks lived there and had orchard space, I guess, on Peck Orchard Road.
Okay.
And moving into that, the house itself now is about 150 years old. It was the Old Peck House. I mean, that's
what it was.
even though the Pecks hadn't lived there for years.
Right. Okay, so it was a farmhouse.
Yeah, it's a farmhouse. Yeah.
Okay, what was your and you've been so your children were born in Granby, or were they?
Yes.
Okay, so they went through the Granby schools. They were members of the Granby kids. What was your experience? I mean, thinking back, I mean, what were the highlights of that experience? I mean, obviously you like the town, but what were some of the things that you remember being as unique about that, raising a family in Granby during that era? Kind of a convoluted question, but if
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, if you insist, Mike, yeah, it is. I think that, trying to sort of comparing it to the experience of our grandchildren, our kids, and what I also see, when I go down to the Y now,
Yeah.
to try to keep this down, and our kids, with the exception of the boys, when the girls went through school, there was no kindergarten, so they only had 12 years worth of schooling.
Right.
And when it was time for them to take the bus in the morning, they were kicked out of the house to the edge of the road, and
So you said go to school.
go to school.
Yeah.
And now you see parents concerned.
They'll stand out when they're.
I guess justifiably, they're sitting there, either with the child or in a car with the child.
Yeah.
Until the bus comes to pick them up.
So it's a much more.
And it's a much more, sort of controlled environment. And also our kids, I think in large part because of where we lived, used to sort of go off into the pucker brush and run around in the woods. And you don't see that much, I think, of that happening anymore.
We had a guest a few weeks ago that said something very similar. He said you never see kids playing anymore by themselves in a group, whereas when, playing baseball, there's always adults there.
Yeah.
That's an interesting observation. Yeah.
Well, I think it's too bad. I think kids should learn how to play by themselves. I don't think mom and dad should run things
I agree.
for that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think partly it's the way society is organized, but also to some degree what they want and what you want and what you're capable of doing.
Right.
And of course, when the kids grow up and then they start telling you what happened that you didn't know about.
Yeah.
And they find out stories from
that's how they
some of
learn,
them in terms of why they might not have come home that night.
Right.
But anyway,
all those experiences raising kids.
Yeah.
So that was a difference. So I guess that would kind of extrapolate into the structure. It's more structured now. Everything's kind of segmented. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. What are the? I have some generic questions that I ask folks, and we'll get back to what your experience is in the town. But what are the biggest changes in Granby that you've? I mean, you've kind of touched on a few of them, but what are the biggest changes from 1960 to 2012? If you were trying to qualify them?
Well, some of it has to do with what I was involved in. I got involved early with the Ambulance Association.
Okay. Was that your first civic involvement in town?
Other than, I think, being a Sunday school teacher.
Okay.
I wasn't very good at, but I did get involved in the Ambulance Association when it started up, and was with it for about almost 20 years.
You remember about when that was?
63 to 81 or 82, I think.
So it wasn't long after you moved to town?
No.
Okay.
No. We'd had the experience that Sue's mom was coming over to see her while she was pregnant with number 2 daughter, and was involved in an accident right by the first church.
Okay.
And was rather badly injured. And she was a fairly stoic New Englander, sat up in the back of the Don Algren's police cruiser,
Okay.
which was a Chevrolet sedan.
Yep.
And Don was the police force at that time.
Okay.
He was, and rode into Hartford.
No ambulance, no. Just
With nothing. I mean, and she had every rib on her left side was broken, and she was
a rough ride.
She had a rough ride, and when we started the ambulance, I had a certain feeling that perhaps I ought to participate in that. And
So you saw a need.
well, some other people saw the need. I saw the ability to be able to become part of it. So, and I kept doing that until I got involved with the Board of Ed.
Okay, so you had that. What was your experience like in the formation of that? I mean, I've heard various different descriptions of starting an institution like that and watching it evolve. What are your any observations on that? I mean, comparing 1963 and today.
It was a lot easier to get something like that started. You've got
Okay.
all kinds of people, at the federal and state levels trying to help.
Right.
And at that time, it was a question of having an ambulance and or having some vehicle and having some level of training. The people who started it up, it was in '63, as I recall, had gotten a surplus Air Force ambulance.
Okay.
So it was painted blue.
Okay.
It was essentially, I think, as I recall, it was either a Pontiac or an Oldsmobile station wagon,
Okay.
2-door. Okay, low top.
Yeah.
And so you had to stuff the cot or the stretcher in the back,
Okay.
and then sort of crawl in beside it because you couldn't. There were only 2 doors. So that never made it on the road. We bought a a used Cadillac ambulance, which was the state of the art in those days.
Okay.
And were trained in either advanced or basic first aid, Red Cross first aid.
Okay.
And we all wore white jackets and
Really?
white coats and
Kind of like a physician.
yeah. Well, that was
Yeah.
and really the routine was you'd go to the scene of an accident or whatever and provide whatever first aid in terms of trying to patch people up you could, get them into the ambulance, and then get to Hartford as quickly as you could.
Not a lot of sophisticated equipment.
It was not very sophisticated. No,
Just get them there as fast as you can.
Get them as fast as we can, and we did, I think, reasonably well in fulfilling that. The price was right. We didn't charge a nickel
Okay.
for anything, so it was all through contributions, no tax money,
Okay.
all through contributions, regardless of what it was. If you were being trained or taking a ride in the ambulance, it was all free. And then we got to the point of buying our first new Cadillac. I think we went through 2 or 3 of those until 1975, when the new so-called new EMS regulations came through through the state, and that required ambulances that look more like what we have now, plus EMT training.
Okay.
Which caused some disquiet with us. Because it started out as this was a macho man's organization.
Okay.
Couldn't have any women in the
No nurses.
No. And in '75, when the regulations came in, I ended up running the thing for a while. One of the first things that I did was to break the sex barrier.
Okay.
We welcomed any and all.
Okay. So this is like the mid '70s.
This mid '70s.
Yeah. A lot of things changed. In the
Many
mid-70s.
Had some really interesting times trying to get people trained, because the training requirements were hugely increased over what we had done in the past, plus the fact that the ambulances themselves were much more expensive. And we had also equipment requirements that weren't there before.
There was a lot of grumbling about that at the time?
Well, there was just a lot of how the dickens are we going to do it.
Right.
I don't think there was any argument on anybody's part that this was going to improve the service.
Okay.
But, again, we were being told by Hartford what to do. And anyway, I guess the only thing after that was in the early 80s, we bought some land up at the intersection of Wells Road and North Granby Road.
Okay.
And built our own new building.
Yep.
Because prior to that, we were in the old North Granby Firehouse, which was, for those people who know, is just after Shaw's Garage.
Okay.
And it was made available to us by the fire department when they built their then new North Granby Firehouse.
Okay.
So we had a place to put our ambulance, and a little supply closet that was about 2 feet deep by about 8 feet high that had all our equipment in it. So then we then raised the money and built the building after buying the land, which is where the ambulance facility is now.
Still to this day.
They've gone through a renovation and an addition to it.
Well, did you feel it was fairly well supported by the community? I mean,
if you're doing everything for nothing, and they're willing to step up,
donate
and donate. I mean, we had people like Hal Pierce who contributed to his expertise as a builder, and I guess he also put the arm on all his suppliers to be nice to us.
Okay. So you work together as a community to
we work very well as a community, and I think since I got out of that, now it's they've gotten into using insurance money. They're much better, probably trained than we were even then.
Okay.
And but you take the ride in the ambulance now, you pay for it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
part of the way they fund it.
That's changed significantly.
So going back, I mean, it sounds like you're describing a fairly standard evolution of a group through a 50-year cycle. I mean, it's basically things change; they get more complicated, especially in medicine. I mean, that's one of the areas where things really kind of seem to have leapfrogged almost. So okay, so you're involved with the ambulance association. You're doing that. You're raising your family. What's your next step in East Granby or Granby? What did you do with the? What was your next involvement?
Well, if you've ever been a volunteer ambulance type, you realize that when you're on duty, every once in a while you get called, and it could be in the middle of the night. It could be just about during in the middle of dinner. It could be any time.
Be pretty disruptive.
And it can be pretty disruptive. And I remember my wife Sue saying, "Gee, Cal, you really ought to think about doing something else. This is taking too much of your time."
Right.
And why don't you run for the Board of Education?
What was the inspiration for that?
Well, she figured, I don't know. We'd have to talk to her about that.
Okay.
Anyway, so I did.
Okay.
And I was elected.
Were you vocal? Did you have opinions on it prior to running? I mean, were you?
Oh, sure.
Were you involved in any other way prior to running?
Not in the Board of Ed, no.
Okay.
Not in education, no. Other than being a parent of
okay.
4 kids who happened to be in the schools at the time.
Right.
And So so this is great because it's only 2 meetings a month and nothing to worry about.
The bell doesn't go off at 2 in the morning.
It doesn't, but it also isn't 2 meetings a month. It's a much bigger commitment.
Board of Ed is a big commitment.
But anyway, I was doing both of them for a while, and it got to the point of having to recertify as an EMT or participate in our budget workshops for the next town budget, and they happened to coincide exactly on the same nights.
So now you're on the Board of Ed?
I was on.
And you're still on the ambulance?
Right.
Okay, so you ran.
So I ran, and I
And
made
how did that happen? Who did you reach out to? Were you involved politically prior to that, or did you just
No.
approach the town chairman and say, hey, I'd like to...
Actually, I was asked
Okay.
and went through a sort of an evolution to get on. But anyway, it happened.
Okay.
But it was a choice then. It could either be on stay on the Board of Ed, which I had agreed to do, or stay on the ambulance and get rid of the Board of Ed. So I essentially got rid of the ambulance situation.
Okay, so what was your first impression of the Board of Ed? Or relatively first. What was your...
Well, since I'm still on the Board of
Yeah.
Ed, I have to be careful about what I say.
No, it's
No,
I think you're
I'm
pretty
being
safe.
facetious. No, we I think we've made over the past years that I've been on the board, we have really, I think, evolved as a school system.
Okay. Why don't we get what year did you first...
I was started in '81.
Okay. So that was just before the big kind of changes in Granby and a lot of
Oh,
investment.
things were growing. We had
Okay.
things were, and we then had a full day kindergarten, and we had growing school population, and a lot of focus on the part of the state in terms of especially teacher salaries being too low. One of the first things we did in terms of trying to expand, we were actually in 600 square feet of space in the town hall.
Okay. It's a pretty small space for a Board of Ed.
Yes, and actually this building was purchased by the town
Okay.
for I think something like $120,000 at the time. This room, this
We're
studio
sitting in right now. Okay.
was our business office.
No, so this was the Board of Ed.
This was the Board of Ed. Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've been involved with a few things in town. And what was it when you walked through the doors and you first became a member of the Board of Ed? There's always something, any group you join, there's something that strikes you. Like, what did you see the most pressing need at the time?
The thing that we originally got involved in, I think as a board, within the first couple of years after I joined it, was trying to come up with a comprehensive long-range facilities plan.
So the infrastructure was an issue.
Well, we had the original Kearns and Wells Road schools, which were built on the cheap
Right.
in the mid-1950s,
Okay.
using the same set of plans. And it was essentially a classroom block attached to an all-purpose room at a different level, with no library, no facilities whatsoever.
Right.
And the original so-called Building 1 at the high school complex, which was the original consolidated memorial school.
Okay.
And I can remember when we moved in, Building 2, which was the piece that juts off toward the northwest now, and of course it's attached, was referred to as the high school.
Okay.
by the realtor, very proudly at that
Okay.
time. And the Kelly Lane School was built in 1961, shortly after we got here, and it had a little bit more in terms of facilities, but we didn't have a central office. We didn't have elementary schools that had any capacity for the things that were evolving, like special education, a lot of the requirements that were not there when they were built.
So it sounds like your whole infrastructure you were looking at potentially having to revamp everything.
Yeah, so we put together essentially a 25-year plan
Okay.
that is at this point essentially complete,
Okay.
with some little odds and ends that are still there. But when the new athletic complex at the high school is completed next year, we will be at about 99%. So we built a new middle school. We did a major renovation on the high school. In addition to the high school, we've added to Kearns as a K-2 school and Kelly and Wells as intermediate schools, major, essentially doubled them in size.
Right.
And renovated, and have our central office as well.
From your experience going through that, because that's a pretty dramatic process that you went through. You have the community you have to deal with, you have the parents, you have the staff.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back, any observations? Anything that you would have done differently or would have done?
Well, we got involved with CPAC. I don't know if you've.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Well, that's the Capital Project Planning Advisory Committee.
Okay.
I think I got my acronym correct.
Okay.
There. And it was put together at the behest of the Board of Selectmen in around 1983 or 4 or something like that.
So that's within Granby.
It is still involved in Granby, and it's still used today.
It was put in place as a behest of the regional selectmen?
No. Within Granby,
okay,
to find a way for us essentially to put our plans together.
Okay.
Because the selectmen had requirements and demands as well.
Right.
For infrastructure that they needed.
Okay.
Town garages, firehouses,
so you did
police stations.
All at once? You tried to figure
So we
out?
tried to get all of that stuff put together.
Wow.
And CPAC was created, and I was very interested in that from the standpoint of trying to put together if you will, a mathematical model that would allow us to understand how we were going to do that.
And financially.
Yes, because
the big question.
Right. At the time, I was working for IBM, and we had just announced the personal computer.
Okay.
And they had an employee purchase plan, and I actually ended up with probably one of the first.
Oh, no kidding.
PCs in Granby.
Right. Before Steve Jobs got his hands.
Oh yeah, it's long. And we put together, as part of this CPAC planning process, something that is in essence the philosophy of it is used today.
Okay.
But most importantly, it allowed or required that the Board of Finance, the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Education communicate with each other.
Right.
And work together, as opposed to not. And in some cases in other towns, they don't work together.
No, they don't.
And I think we were able to work together and be very transparent on it.
Okay.
And I think people in town understood that and supported what we were doing.
What was the secret of communicating that to the town properly? So it sounds like you were able to go through this process with pretty strong community support. There wasn't a lot of contention?
I think the first referendum on the middle school was a problem. But we actually, when we started out, the first project that we thought we should deal with for a number of reasons, which I won't bother to get into, but was the new center firehouse.
Okay.
And I can remember talking to Bob Beeman, who was then the fire chief.
Okay.
And I went in to buy something from him.
Yeah.
And Bob, guess what?
Yeah.
You're going to get your fire. I said, oh, come on, Cal, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Believe me, it's going to happen. Because we were essentially trying to organize it in such a way.
Prioritize.
From the standpoint of priorities in terms of need and priorities in terms of the way in which we were putting the financial plan together.
Okay.
And so it said, don't try to bite off something that you can't deal with right away.
Right.
do something else first. And I think actually we ended up with the new town garage second. But anyway, we had a problem with the middle school. It took 2 referenda to get it passed. But
Okay.
other than that, every project that we put forward, the town recognized the need. We were transparent as to the cost, and they supported it, every one of them. And I'm really thankful to the town and pleased that that there was that level of understanding and trust
Right.
that went forward. But
Do you attribute that to the foresight of the plan? Do you attribute that to more communication? What was the...
well, we were required of ourselves
Right.
in this CPAC planning process
Okay.
to essentially to put forward things that made sense
Well,
and be able to defend them.
yeah, okay.
And it was completely transparent, so that
Right.
the public had the opportunity and really the obligation to understand what was going on and why.
How
it
is
was
that
going
communicated? Because that's always what I see as the gap. I mean, there's oftentimes this is a little bit off subject here, but oftentimes I see communication as being the biggest gap. I mean, it's really hard to communicate, and then the project shows up, and people act like they're completely confused, or maybe legitimately confused.
Surprised.
Surprised, yeah.
Right.
It sounds like you did a pretty good job of telegraphing this to the town.
We actually early on really insisted by the Board of Finance. We used to have to agree to commit to a level of operational spending that would be limited in favor of the additional cost for bonding the projects.
Got it. Okay.
So the so-called statements of commitment, which I think we had 2 of them that we went through, one for the middle school and one for the high school.
Okay,
Those were done very much in public, and people were aware of the agonizing that we had to go through to make sure that those were dealt with. We haven't bothered with that since, but if you look at the budget process as it operates now, when we go to town meeting, and I hope people continue to go to town meeting, even though we're on a referendum situation now. You don't see the Board of Finance and the Board of Education, the Board of Selectmen fighting with each other. You see us coming forward saying this is something that we've dealt with, and we agree this can be done. And that is the way in which the budget process has evolved
Okay.
over the past 30 some odd years, where in a sense we have the Board of Finance figure out what they think is a rational level of spending,
Right.
which we then, from a Board of Ed and a Selectman's perspective, trust and craft budgets that match those.
To fit that. Okay.
So we don't get into this business of asking for some ridiculous amount of money and then
Having to go back and forth.
go back and
yeah.
forth. We don't do that.
Right.
We haven't done that in my experience probably in the last 20 years.
Okay.
And
So you feel it's worked well for Granby?
I think it's worked very well for
Yeah.
Granby. Yeah.
Well, certainly sustain the town in a way that's, tenable. I mean,
No, and if you look at our infrastructure right now, and you look at the quality of municipal services that we've got, and the quality of the school system, and do we pay high taxes in Granby? Yeah, I guess we do.
yeah.
Do we pay very high taxes? No. When you really look at the grand list in terms of the cost of housing.
Not only that, but the grand list in terms of its composition.
Right.
You have
this is 90 some odd percent
residential.
residential.
Yes, that's a difficult
So
nexus to.
I mean, we live in a community that we like to live in,
Right.
that has got a super volunteer spirit,
Right.
We have good facilities, good services, and do we pay for it? Sure, but what's new about that?
It's the price of life.
That's why we didn't move out after the first 2 years. I
You
guess.
felt like that was heading in the right direction.
Well, we just liked it.
Yeah. Okay. So, what if you were to describe Granby? Somebody calls you up, a friend of yours from California, and says, "I'm thinking about moving to Granby. Can you tell me about it?" How would you do that?
I think I just did.
You did, but if in a soundbite, if there was a
If there's a sound bite, what's. I don't know that I really go for the pride of the valley, which is what's on the signs out there. But
sounds good.
I think it's it's a friendly place where people care for they care for the town and they care for each other, I guess is the best way to put it.
Good community.
Yeah.
Okay. What if like I've got 2 or 3 generic questions I'll throw at you before we close up here. Well, if you could change, I mean, you've been very involved with the process here in town, so you're, you really kind of understand it. If there was one thing, if you had a magic wand for Granby, what would you do? I mean, assuming there's no budget involved.
No, there's no money.
No, it doesn't cost anything.
Given where we are and what we have,
Yeah.
I guess the thing that I would love to find us a way to do to sort of fix, I think, an asset that we have that has suffered over the years, I think for a lot of reasons, and that's the Holcomb Farm. I would love to find a way for us to endow it somehow so that its potential could be realized in a way that was somewhat helped in past years with some of the school farm programs that we had, but which unfortunately fell on evil days.
Okay.
But now, we have the CSA, which is doing quite well, but there's an awful lot of additional potential that I think that would.
So you would like to see that developed to its fullest potential, or fuller potential, or
Well, I think given a board of trustees that would have sufficient resources
okay.
to be able to really take that to the next step.
It is quite a gem. I mean, it's a beautiful place. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, if you is there anything we should mention, which we haven't done. First of all, let's mention what are your children's names? Because we kind of jumped over that.
Well, our eldest is Sarah.
Okay.
She's married and lives in Pomfret with her husband and 3 kids.
Okay.
One of whom is in college. The other 2 are at Woodstock Academy.
Okay.
Our daughter Debbie lives down in Old Lyme with her husband, and they have 2 boys.
Okay.
One of whom is at UConn. And our son Seth lives down in Falls Church, Virginia, with his wife and 2 kids.
Okay.
And our baby, I guess, our youngest is Bill, lives up in Shoreham, Vermont, with his wife and 3 kids.
Oh, okay. So you have this kind of leads right into our last question, which is you have 10 grandchildren. You said.
Yeah.
Okay. You have 10 grandchildren. What is the advice? And you're the chairman of the Board of Ed, and you've been that for how many years?
I don't know, 10?
Quite a few years. Okay. So you have 10 grandchildren. You're the chairman of the Board of Ed. What is your advice to kids growing up today, if you were to give them Cal's wisdom?
Cal's wisdom. not worth very much.
Keep in mind your
Mike.
wife's watching.
I think Cal's wisdom, probably in today's environment, is that kids growing up should understand that life is not necessarily fair.
Okay.
That you can't legislate behavior. You can't legislate equalizing income. You can't, you have to make it based upon your contributions to the world.
Okay.
And I think that kids today should understand that that they have an obligation, both to themselves and to society,
Right.
to get out there and participate.
Okay. So personal responsibility in some ways. I mean, it sounds like.
I guess so.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you tonight, Cal. Is there anything before we wrap up? Is there anything you wanted to share, or is it?
I thought I had been.
You shared a lot. No, I mean, I was.
That was the close cut. No.
That was a close. Okay. All right. So we're good. All right. Well, thank you for joining us here tonight on Reflections on Granby. Our guest tonight was Cal Heminway, longtime resident and very active civic member of Granby, and we thank you for joining us here tonight. But by the way, today's date is December 8th, 2012. And you can view our shows on www.gctv16.org and pull up the prompts for the Reflections shows, as well as all of our other productions. Have a good night. Thank you.